If a car suddenly swerves into your lane, you experience an immediate surge of fear. The standard lay assumption is that fear is a specific, distinct object inside your head, sitting in wait to be triggered by the right event. Classical psychology treats the brain like a Victorian filing cabinet. When a threat appears, it yanks open a dedicated drawer for that emotion. But modern heat maps show the amygdala fails to light up consistently, instead activating wide distributed networks. A generation of affective neuroscientists, spearheaded by researchers like Kristen Lindquist and Lisa Feldman Barrett, have taken a hammer to the filing cabinet model. They demonstrated that if you put two people in an fMRI to rate their anxiety, both might report identical intensities, but their brains will show markedly different patterns of neural connectivity. Whatever anxiety is, it is not a singular, localized physical object kept in a cranial cupboard. The decades-long search for an emotion thing inside the skull was chasing a phantom, establishing the need for an entirely new model of human affect. To build an accurate model, we have to look at the brain's actual primary function. The brain is not an engine built for conscious contemplation. Instead, its day job is predictive bodily regulation. It adjusts your blood pressure before you even finish standing up. Conscious cognition and emotional states are elaborate side effects of this anticipatory survival machinery. Consider a practical example. You climb a steep flight of stairs and arrive in a crowded room with a highly elevated heart rate. Your brain must organize what that baseline bodily state means. Based on the social context of the crowded room, that racing heart is taken up and categorized as nervousness. We replace the old causal cartoon, where a frightening thing directly triggers fear, with a recursive visual formula. Bodily state plus situation, history, learned categories, and prediction results in something classified as fear. Emotions are situated compressions of distributed bodily and environmental processes. This effectively dissolves the emotion thing as a physical object waiting to be discovered in the brain. The empirical demolition work is excellent. However, accepting the machinery of predictive processing does not obligate us to accept the representational grammar that researchers are currently attaching to it. In philosophy, there is a recurring habit of removing a metaphysical essence through the front door, only to invite the factory that produces that essence in through the kitchen. Having elegantly dissolved the emotion thing, constructivist psychologists speak as if they discovered the mechanism that manufactures it. They argue the brain predicts and then creates the emotional object. We can redescribe predictive processing strictly as the anticipatory stabilization of an organism within an environment. That mechanical framework requires no internal model builder busily fabricating emotional states. The danger of this grammatical slip is that the essences return. By claiming the brain manufactures distinct feelings for a conscious subject to receive, we accidentally reinstall the exact same emotion object we just finished dismantling. This linguistic trap leads to a specific logical error in the literature, the phenomenological slide. The slide occurs when researchers observe a difference in emotion concepts across cultures and use that observation to declare a difference in raw emotion experiences. We can test this through a cross-cultural case study. In Japanese, the term amae describes a specific pleasurable dependency on another person's indulgence. If we map the semantic networks of both languages, the discrepancy is obvious. The Japanese structure features a distinct node for amae, while the English network contains a topological void at that coordinate. This forces a specific tension. Because English speakers lack the exact lexical category, do they lack the biological capability to feel the underlying sensation? Consider the experience of letting someone go considerably out of their way to care for you, and the warm, slightly shameless pleasure of accepting it. That experiential configuration is immediately recognizable to an English speaker. Proving that a culture lacks a dictionary entry establishes differences in semantic segmentation, conceptualization, and reporting. It does not establish the absence of the underlying phenomenological field. The ineffable feeling does perfectly well of a dictionary's quarrel over ownership. We can apply this exact same logic to historical language evolution. The semantic structure of the word sadness acquired its modern definition comparatively recently, but changing definitions over centuries do not erase the raw phenomenology of past humans. The historical contingency of a noun cannot prove that a person walking down a street in the year 1400 was physically incapable of undergoing an experiential state closely resembling what a person today calls sadness. The trap pulling at these researchers is an old philosophical hazard, a drift toward linguistic determinism, often known as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. There is a highly plausible, weaker version of this claim. Language provides culturally inherited partitions and interpretive expectations. These partitions reliably feed back into our attention, memory, and subsequent predictions. But the literature frequently assumes that a different linguistic structure dictates a completely different internal phenomenology. The evidence points to a different sequence. A phenomenological event meets culturally conditioned salience, leading to a conceptual partition, linguistic compression, and a report, with backward feedback loops. A label participates in the interpretation of an event and alters its subsequent trajectory. But participating in interpretation is a long way from manufacturing the raw bodily affective event in the first place. The resolution to this debate lies in what we can call the language insufficiency hypothesis. We must stop treating linguistic categories as ontological bins that perfectly hold reality, and recognize them as heuristic regions designed for rapid communication. Language is a synchronization protocol between minds. To transmit an infinitely variable, high-resolution affective state from one mind to another, that signal is forced to downsample. The fundamental rule of this protocol is that linguistic compression is necessarily and irrecoverably lossy. Compression is a form of amnesia. By the time an internal state reaches the level of a spoken noun, massive amounts of data have been discarded. If language is necessarily lossy, then discovering that different cultures compress affect in different ways is exactly what we should predict. It is the expected baseline, not a bombshell revelation. Cultural variations in emotion labels tell us a great deal about our encoding architectures and how we forget. They tell us considerably less about the full resolution human encounter that was there to be forgotten. We can acknowledge the valid neuroscience. Language and culture do partition and stabilize human affective experience in highly varied ways. We simply need to respect the limits of the evidence. These partitions are weak evidence for delimiting the actual phenomenological experiences available to human consciousness. To separate the tool of measurement from the subject being measured, we can look at a final Whorfian temptation. Imagine two differently shaped, rigid fishing nets plunged into an abstract, fluid ocean. Each net pulls up different configurations of shapes trapped in its grid. But because the net catches differently shaped fish, one cannot conclude that the sea itself has changed shape. Neuroscience successfully dissolved the emotion thing, returning us to the fluid sea of human affect. We only need to ensure we leave it dissolved, rather than letting linguistic determinism sneak through the kitchen door to manufacture it all over again.